Right now, as you read these words, approximately 100 billion neutrinos are passing through your body, every single second. They're streaming through your eyes, your brain, your fingertips. Most of them will pass through the entire Earth without interacting with a single atom. But here's what will stop you cold. According to the mathematics of quantum mechanics, until you observed this sentence, those neutrinos existed in a state of superposition, simultaneously everywhere and nowhere. Your act of reading, of observing, of becoming conscious of their existence, fundamentally changed their quantum state. Not metaphorically, physically. This isn't philosophy. This is physics. In 1927, at the 5th Solvay Conference in Brussels, the greatest minds in physics gathered to discuss a problem that was tearing apart everything humanity thought it knew about reality. Albert Einstein, Niels Bohr, Werner Heisenberg, Erwin Schrödinger, 29 Nobel Prize winners in one room, and they couldn't agree on the most basic question in science. Does reality exist when nobody's looking? The argument that erupted that October would define physics for the next century. Einstein insisted that the moon exists whether or not anyone observes it. Bohr argued that we have no right to make such a claim. The debate became so heated that Einstein would later write to a colleague, _quote _0 _. But the mathematics didn't care what Einstein found tolerable. Let me take you to a laboratory at the University of Munich in 2012. Physicist Marcus Arndt and his team are preparing an experiment that sounds like science fiction. They've constructed a device that fires individual molecules, not atoms, but complex molecules made of hundreds of atoms, toward a barrier with two slits. The room is dark. The temperature is controlled to within a fraction of a degree. Every vibration is dampened. They're about to demonstrate something that will challenge your understanding of what real means. They fire a single molecule. It travels toward the barrier. Logic tells you it must go through one slit or the other. That's how objects work in the world you know. A baseball thrown at a fence with two gaps goes through one gap. Not both. Never both. But when they're not watching which slit the molecule goes through, something impossible happens. The molecule behaves as if it goes through both slits simultaneously. It interferes with itself, creates a pattern on the detector screen that can only be explained if the single molecule somehow knew about both paths, traveled both paths, existed in both places at once. Now here's where your brain should start tingling. They modify the experiment. They add a detector to observe which slit the molecule actually goes through. They change nothing else. Same molecule, same slits, same distance, same temperature. The only difference? Now they're watching. The interference pattern vanishes. The molecule, somehow, knows it's being observed. It stops behaving like a wave spread across multiple possibilities and collapses into a single, definite path. The act of observation, of measurement, of consciousness interacting with the system, fundamentally changes what the molecule does. This is the observer effect. And it's not a flaw in our equipment. It's not a measurement error. It's not a limitation of our technology. After nearly a century of experiments, with increasingly sophisticated equipment, the conclusion remains inescapable. Observation changes reality at the quantum level. But let's be precise about what we mean by quote 2, because this is where most explanations go wrong, and where pseudoscience loves to creep in. When physicists say quote 3, they don't mean a conscious human looking at something. They mean any interaction that extracts information from a quantum system. A photon hitting an electron is an observation. A detector clicking is an observation. The question that's haunted physics for a century is this: is consciousness special? Does it play a unique role in collapsing quantum possibilities into definite realities? For decades, most physicists avoided this question like a plague. It sounded too mystical, too close to the kind of quantum woo-woo that sells books about manifesting your dreams. The standard Copenhagen interpretation, developed by Niels Bohr and Werner Heisenberg, simply stated that measurement collapses the wave function, and we shouldn't ask what happens before measurement. Shut up and calculate, as physicist David Mermin later summarized the attitude. But some physicists couldn't shut up. In 1961, a Hungarian-American physicist named Eugene Wigner proposed something radical. Wigner had already won the Nobel Prize for his work on symmetry principles. He wasn't a fringe thinker, and he suggested that consciousness might be the key ingredient that collapses quantum wave functions. His thought experiment, now called Wigner's friend, goes like this. Imagine a friend of yours is in a sealed laboratory, measuring the spin of an electron. From your friend's perspective, the measurement happens, the wave function collapses, and the electron has a definite spin. Let's say, up. But you're outside the laboratory. From your perspective, until you open the door and ask your friend what they observed, the entire laboratory, including your friend and their measurement, exists in a superposition of states. Your friend simultaneously observed spin up and spin down. This seems absurd. Your friend is conscious. They experienced one definite outcome. How can they be in a superposition from your perspective? Wigner's conclusion: consciousness must collapse the wave function. A conscious observer cannot be in a superposition. Therefore, when your friend made the observation, their consciousness collapsed the wave function, not just for them, but objectively. Most physicists dismiss this. Too weird. Too hard to test. Too close to suggesting that human consciousness has special physical properties. But then, the experiments started coming in. In 1998, researchers at the Weizmann Institute of Science in Israel conducted a variation of the double-slit experiment that would become one of the most cited papers in quantum mechanics. They used a quantum interferometer with buckyballs, molecules made of 60 carbon atoms arranged in a soccer ball shape. These aren't subatomic particles. These are large, complex molecules. And they still showed wave-like interference. The team, led by Marcus Arndt and Anton Zeilinger, added detectors near the slits that could, in principle, determine which path each buckyball took. Here's the crucial detail. They could turn the detectors on or off. When the detectors were off, when no information about the path was being recorded anywhere, the interference pattern appeared. When the detectors were on, even if no human ever looked at the data, the interference pattern disappeared. This suggested that it wasn't human consciousness that mattered, but the physical act of information being recorded in the environment. The universe itself, through the interaction of quantum systems, was doing the observing. Case closed, right? Consciousness isn't special. It's just physical interactions all the way down. Not so fast. In 2011, a team at the University of California, Santa Barbara, led by physicist Andrew Cleland, managed to create a quantum superposition of a mechanical resonator, a tiny metal paddle visible to the naked eye. For the first time, an object large enough to see was placed in a quantum superposition. It was simultaneously vibrating and not vibrating. But here's what kept physicists up at night. The superposition only lasted as long as the system remained isolated from observation. The moment it interacted with its environment, the moment information about its state could, in principle, be extracted, the superposition collapsed. This process is called decoherence, and it happens incredibly fast for large objects. For something the size of a dust particle, superposition collapses in less than a billionth of a second due to interactions with air molecules and photons. This is why you don't see chairs in superposition. Not because chairs don't follow quantum mechanics, they do, but because they're constantly being observed by their environment. Photons bounce off them. Air molecules collide with them. Information about their state is continuously being extracted and dispersed into the environment. But this raises a profound question. What counts as, quote, 6? What counts as, quote, 7? In 2015, a controversial paper appeared in the journal Physics Essays by researchers Dean Radin, Lena Michel, and others. They claimed to have found evidence that human observation, conscious attention, could influence the outcome of a double-slit experiment beyond what decoherence alone would predict. They ran the experiment thousands of times, sometimes with people focusing their attention on the apparatus, sometimes without. They reported a small but statistically significant difference in the interference pattern. The physics community largely rejected these findings. The effect size was tiny, the methodology was questioned. Replication attempts failed, or showed inconsistent results. This is exactly the kind of claim that makes serious physicists nervous. It sounds too much like the observer effect being misused to justify magical thinking. But here's what's fascinating. Even the critics couldn't completely dismiss the underlying question, because there's a genuine mystery at the heart of quantum mechanics that remains unsolved. Let me show you why this mystery matters by taking you deeper into what happens during a quantum measurement. When a quantum system is isolated, not interacting with anything, it evolves according to the Schrödinger equation. This evolution is smooth, deterministic, and reversible. The system exists in a superposition of all possible states simultaneously, with each state having a certain probability amplitude. This is called the wave function. But when a measurement occurs, something different happens. The wave function doesn't smoothly evolve anymore. It suddenly, discontinuously, randomly collapses into one definite state. This is called the collapse of the wave function, and it's described by a completely different mathematical rule than the Schrödinger equation. This is bizarre. Physics doesn't usually have two completely different sets of rules for the same thing. Imagine if gravity worked one way when you weren't looking at a falling apple, and a completely different way when you were. That's essentially what quantum mechanics says. So physicists have proposed alternatives. Many alternatives. The many worlds interpretation, developed by Hugh Everett in 1957, says there is no collapse. The wave function never collapses. Instead, every time a quantum measurement occurs, the universe splits into multiple branches. In one branch, you measure spin up. In another branch, you measure spin down. Both outcomes happen, just in different universes. Consciousness doesn't collapse anything. It just gets entangled with the quantum system and splits along with it. This interpretation is mathematically elegant. It requires no special collapse mechanism. But it comes with the rather extravagant price tag of requiring an infinite number of parallel universes constantly branching off from every quantum event. The de Broglie-Bohm interpretation, also called pilot wave theory, says particles always have definite positions, but they're guided by a quantum wave that does spread out and interfere with itself. There's no collapse, no splitting universes, but there is, quote, 8. Particles instantaneously influence each other across any distance. The quantum Bayesianism interpretation, or cubism, developed by Carlton Caves, Christopher Fuchs, and Rudiger Schack, takes a radically different approach. It says the wave function isn't a real physical thing at all. It's just a mathematical tool that represents an observer's subjective knowledge about a system. When the wave function collapses, nothing physical happens. The observer simply updates their knowledge based on new information. In this view, quantum mechanics is fundamentally about information and belief, not about objective reality independent of observers. Different observers can legitimately assign different wave functions to the same system based on their different states of knowledge. This sounds like it makes consciousness central to quantum mechanics. But cubism's proponents are careful to clarify. Any agent that processes information counts as an observer. It doesn't have to be conscious. A thermostat is an observer. A bacterium is an observer. Consciousness isn't special in cubism. Information processing is. Yet the question persists. Is there something unique about conscious observation? In 2016, physicist Matthew Fisher at the University of California, Santa Barbara, proposed a mechanism by which quantum effects might persist in the warm, wet environment of the brain long enough to influence neural processing. He focused on phosphorus atoms in Posner molecules, calcium phosphate clusters that might protect quantum states from decoherence for up to a day. Fisher wasn't claiming that consciousness collapses wave functions. He was exploring the opposite question. Could quantum mechanics play a role in how consciousness works? Could the brain be using quantum effects for information processing? This is a legitimate scientific question, distinct from the mystical claim that consciousness has magical quantum powers. The difference is crucial. Here's the distinction. Saying quote 9 is a testable scientific hypothesis. Saying quote 10 is pseudoscience that misunderstands what the observer effect actually means. But, and this is a big but, there is a genuine sense in which observation participates in creating reality, and it's more profound than most people realize. Let me take you back to the double-slit experiment, but this time we're going to add a twist that will bend your brain. In 1978, physicist John Wheeler proposed a thought experiment called the _11_. Here's how it works. A photon is fired toward a beam splitter, a half-silvered mirror that reflects 50% of photons and transmits 50%. After the beam splitter, the photon could have taken one of two paths. These paths are then brought back together at a second beam splitter, where they can interfere with each other. Now here's the twist. You decide whether to put in that second beam splitter after the photon has already passed the first one. If you put in the second beam splitter, you'll see interference, which means the photon must have taken both paths simultaneously. If you don't put in the second beam splitter, you can detect which path the photon took, and there's no interference. Wheeler's question: how does the photon _12_ whether to behave like a wave, taking both paths, or a particle, taking one path, when it passes the first beam splitter, before you've decided what measurement to make? This was just a thought experiment in 1978, but in 1984, physicists at the University of Maryland actually performed it. And in 2007, a team in France performed a version with single photons traveling over 48 meters, with the choice of measurement made after the photon had already passed the point where it would have decided which path to take. The results confirmed Wheeler's prediction. The choice of measurement you make now affects what the photon did in the past. Not metaphorically. The mathematics and the experimental results both show that the photon's behavior at the first beam splitter depends on a choice you haven't made yet when it reaches that beam splitter. This doesn't mean you can send information backward in time. The results are still probabilistic, and you can't control which outcome you get. But it does mean that the past is not fixed until it's observed. The photon doesn't have a definite history until you make a measurement that gives it one. Wheeler put it this way, quote, "Now let's scale this up, way up." In 2002, physicists performed a cosmic version of the delayed choice experiment using light from distant quasars. A quasar is an incredibly bright galactic nucleus powered by a supermassive black hole, billions of light years away. The light from these quasars has been traveling through space for billions of years. Sometimes, this light passes near a massive galaxy on its way to Earth. The galaxy's gravity bends space-time, acting as a gravitational lens that splits the light into two paths around the galaxy. These two paths can be dozens of thousands of light years apart. When this light reaches Earth, we can choose to measure it in a way that detects which path it took around the galaxy, or we can measure it in a way that allows the two paths to interfere with each other. According to the delayed choice experiment, the photon doesn't decide which path to take until we make our measurement. But this photon has been traveling for billions of years. The universe was younger. Galaxies were different. Stars that no longer exist were still burning when this photon began its journey. Yet our choice of measurement now, today, in a laboratory on Earth, determines which path that photon took billions of years ago. The past, at the quantum level, is not fixed. It's a superposition of possibilities that only becomes definite when observed. This is not mysticism. This is the mathematical structure of quantum mechanics, confirmed by experiment after experiment. But let's be absolutely clear about what this does and doesn't mean. It does not mean you can change the past. The outcomes are still probabilistic, and they're consistent with all other observations. You can't use this to send messages to your past self or prevent historical events. It does not mean your thoughts alone can manifest reality in the everyday world. The quantum effects that allow superposition and observer-dependent reality wash out at large scales due to decoherence. You cannot think a car into existence. What it does mean is that at the fundamental level, reality is not a collection of definite facts existing independently of observation. Reality is a network of quantum possibilities that crystallize into definite outcomes through the process of observation and measurement. And here's where it gets personal. Your brain contains approximately 86 billion neurons. Each neuron connects to thousands of others through synapses. At each synapse, neurotransmitter molecules are released, cross a gap, and bind to receptors. These are quantum mechanical processes. The molecules exist in superposition states. Electrons tunnel through barriers they classically couldn't cross. Now, most physicists believe these quantum effects average out, that the brain operates classically at the level of neural firing. Decoherence happens too fast for quantum superpositions to influence thought. But what if they're wrong? In 2014, a paper in Physical Review E by physicist Matthew Fisher suggested that the brain might have evolved mechanisms to protect certain quantum states from decoherence. Not for mystical reasons, but because quantum effects might provide computational advantages. The ability to process certain types of information more efficiently. If this is true, and it's a big if, still highly controversial, then your thoughts might involve quantum processes. And if your thoughts involve quantum processes, then the act of thinking, of becoming conscious of an idea, might involve the collapse of quantum wave functions in your brain. You would be, quite literally, collapsing possibilities into actualities inside your skull. Not manifesting reality in the external world through wishful thinking, but participating in the quantum mechanical process by which definite experiences emerge from quantum possibilities. This is a far cry from Quote 16 or quantum mysticism. But it's also far stranger than the classical picture of the brain as simply a biological computer running deterministic algorithms. Let me show you just how strange it gets. In 2019, a team of researchers led by Massimiliano Proietti at Heriot-Watt University in Edinburgh performed an experiment that extended Wigner's friend thought experiment into the real world. They used photons and quantum computers to create a situation where two observers could make measurements that, according to quantum mechanics, should give them contradictory but equally valid descriptions of reality. Observer 1 measures a photon and gets a definite result. Observer 2 treats Observer 1 and their measurement as a quantum system in superposition. Both observers are correct within their own reference frame, but their descriptions of reality are incompatible. The experiment confirmed that this situation can actually occur. The paper concluded, Quote 17. Read that again. Facts, objective facts established by measurement, can be different for different observers, and both can be correct. This isn't about perspective or interpretation. This is about the fundamental structure of reality being observer-dependent at the quantum level. So where does this leave us? You are a biological system made of quantum mechanical particles. Your brain processes information through electrochemical signals that, at their foundation, are quantum mechanical. Your sensory systems detect photons, molecules, pressure waves, all quantum mechanical entities. When you observe the world, you're not passively receiving information about a reality that exists independently of you. You're participating in a quantum mechanical interaction that helps determine what becomes real. Not in a magical way. Not in a way that lets you manifest a Ferrari by thinking positive thoughts. But in a deep, physical way that means the universe is not a stage on which you act, but a collaborative process in which observation and reality co-create each other. The photons hitting your retina right now are in superposition until they interact with the rhodopsin molecules in your rod and cone cells. That interaction, that observation, collapses their wave function. The definite color you see, the definite brightness, emerges from that collapse. You are not separate from reality, looking at it from outside. You are part of the quantum mechanical system. Your observations are physical interactions that participate in determining what becomes actual from the field of quantum possibilities. This is what the mathematics tells us. This is what the experiments confirm. And this is what physicists have been grappling with for nearly a century. But here's the question that should be keeping you up at night. If observation collapses wave functions, and if consciousness involves observation, then what happens to all the quantum possibilities that don't get observed? In 1957, a Princeton graduate student named Hugh Everett submitted his doctoral thesis. It contained one of the most audacious ideas in the history of physics, an idea so radical that his advisor, John Wheeler, initially tried to suppress it. Everett's proposal? Every quantum measurement doesn't collapse the wave function. Instead, the universe splits. Every possible outcome happens, just in different branches of reality. You measured spin up? There's another you, in another universe, who measured spin down. Both versions are equally real. Both are you. And this splitting happens not just in laboratories, but everywhere, constantly, trillions upon trillions of times per second, with every quantum interaction in every atom, in every star, in every galaxy. The many worlds interpretation solves the measurement problem elegantly. There's no mysterious collapse. The Schrödinger equation always applies. Everything is deterministic and smooth. The price? An infinity of parallel universes, forever branching, forever multiplying, containing every possible version of history. Most physicists in 1957 thought Everett was insane. Today, according to a poll conducted at a Quantum Foundations conference, many worlds is the most popular interpretation among quantum physicists under 40. Not because we've found evidence for parallel universes, we haven't, and perhaps we can't, but because the mathematics works without requiring any special collapse mechanism. But let's sit with what this means for a moment. If many worlds is correct, then every decision you've ever made, you've also made differently in another branch. Every coin flip that came up heads in this universe came up tails in another. Every quantum event that could have gone differently did go differently, somewhere. The version of you reading these words right now is just one branch among countless others. There are branches where you never learned to read, branches where humans never evolved, branches where Earth never formed. All equally real, all existing in the vast quantum multiverse, all described by the same universal wave function. Your consciousness, your subjective experience of being you, is simply the experience of one particular branch. You can't perceive the other branches because decoherence has separated them. Information can't flow between branches. They're causally disconnected, forever. But here's what makes this interpretation so unsettling. It means that in a very real sense, observation doesn't collapse anything. It just entangles you with the quantum system. When you measure that electron's spin, you don't force it to choose up or down. You become entangled with it. One version of you becomes correlated with spin up, another version with spin down. Both versions exist. Both are you. Both feel like they're the only one. So in many worlds, consciousness doesn't have any special role at all. You're just another quantum system, splitting along with everything else. The feeling that you observe a definite outcome is an illusion created by decoherence separating the branches. This should make you uncomfortable, because it means that the you who started reading this sentence might not be the same you who finishes it. Quantum events in your brain might have caused a split. There might now be multiple versions of you, each with slightly different thoughts, each convinced they're the singular, continuous consciousness that started reading. But let's explore the opposite possibility. What if consciousness does play a special role? In 1967, physicist Henry Stapp began developing an interpretation of quantum mechanics that took consciousness seriously. Stapp had worked with Wolfgang Pauli and Werner Heisenberg. He wasn't a fringe figure. And he argued that the standard Copenhagen interpretation, properly understood, requires consciousness to collapse the wave function. His reasoning went like this. A measurement device is made of atoms. Atoms follow quantum mechanics. So the measurement device itself should be in a superposition until it's observed. But observed by what? Another device? That device is also made of atoms, also in superposition. You can't have an infinite regress of devices measuring devices. At some point, something has to actually collapse the wave function and make a definite outcome real. Stapp's answer? Consciousness. A conscious observer cannot be in a superposition of having observed different outcomes. Consciousness is, by its nature, definite. You experience one thing, not a superposition of experiences. Therefore, when a conscious being makes an observation, the wave function must collapse. This interpretation has a major problem. It seems to require that consciousness is somehow outside the laws of physics, that it's not made of atoms following quantum mechanics like everything else. This sounds like dualism, the idea that mind and matter are fundamentally different substances. And dualism has been scientifically unfashionable since the 17th century. But what if there's a middle path? In 1996, physicist Roger Penrose and anesthesiologist Stuart Hameroff proposed a controversial theory called orchestrated objective reduction, or ORC-OR. They suggested that consciousness arises from quantum computations in microtubules, protein structures inside neurons. These microtubules, they argued, might maintain quantum coherence long enough to perform quantum computations, and consciousness emerges when these quantum states undergo objective reduction, a physical collapse process that Penrose had proposed based on quantum gravity. The theory was immediately attacked. Neuroscientists pointed out that the brain is too warm, too wet, too noisy for quantum coherence to survive. Physicists questioned Penrose's objective reduction mechanism. The theory became a punching bag, an example of what happens when you try to mix quantum mechanics and consciousness. But then something unexpected happened. In 2014, a paper appeared in Physics of Life Reviews, showing that quantum coherence could indeed exist in microtubules at brain temperature, lasting for hundreds of femtoseconds, far longer than previously thought possible. The paper didn't prove ORC-OR correct, but it showed that the main objection, that quantum effects couldn't survive in the brain, might be wrong. Then, in 2022, a team at Trinity College Dublin published research in the Journal of Physics Communications, suggesting they had found evidence of quantum entanglement in the brain. They used MRI scanners to detect a signal that, according to their analysis, could only be explained if the proton spins in brain water were quantum entangled. Again, this doesn't prove that consciousness is quantum mechanical. The interpretation of their results is controversial, but it suggests that quantum effects in the brain might be more prevalent than the standard view assumes. So let's consider the possibility seriously. What if consciousness does involve quantum processes? What would that mean for the observer effect? It would mean that when you become conscious of something, when you pay attention, when you focus your awareness, you might be collapsing quantum wave functions in your brain. Not in the external world, but in the neural correlates of your conscious experience. Think about what happens when you pay attention to something. Neuroscientists know that attention amplifies neural signals. It makes certain patterns of brain activity stronger and more coherent while suppressing others. What if this process involves the collapse of quantum superpositions in neural microtubules or synaptic proteins? Before you pay attention, multiple possible neural patterns exist in superposition. When you focus your attention, one pattern becomes definite. The others, the roads not taken, the thoughts not thought, collapse into non-existence. This would mean that consciousness is literally a process of selecting one reality from multiple quantum possibilities. Not selecting what happens in the external world, but selecting which internal experience becomes actual. You're not manifesting external reality with your thoughts. You're manifesting your internal reality, your subjective experience, by collapsing quantum possibilities in your brain into definite conscious experiences. This is a far more subtle and scientifically respectable idea than quantum mysticism. But it's also profound, because it means that the you who experiences reality is not predetermined. At every moment, quantum possibilities in your brain are collapsing into definite experiences. You are, quite literally, creating your subjective reality, moment by moment, through a quantum mechanical process. But let's push further. Let's ask a question that will take us to the edge of what physics can currently answer. If consciousness involves collapsing quantum wave functions, and if quantum mechanics is the fundamental description of reality, then what is consciousness made of? What is the physical substrate of subjective experience? This is the hard problem of consciousness, articulated by philosopher David Chalmers in 1995. Why does information processing in the brain feel like something? Why is there subjective experience at all? Why aren't we just unconscious zombies, processing information without any inner life? Neuroscience can tell you which brain regions are active when you see red. It can map the neural correlates of consciousness in exquisite detail. But it can't tell you why those neural patterns feel like the experience of redness. Why there's something it's like to be you. Some physicists have suggested that consciousness might be a fundamental feature of reality, like mass or charge. This view, called panpsychism, proposes that even elementary particles have some primitive form of experience. Complex consciousness, like yours, emerges when these simple experiences are integrated in the right way. This sounds crazy. But consider, we know that matter has properties like mass and charge. These properties are fundamental. They can't be reduced to anything simpler. We accept them as basic features of reality because the mathematics requires them and experiments confirm them. What if consciousness is similar? What if subjective experience is a fundamental property that certain physical systems have when they're organized in the right way? Neuroscientist Giulio Tononi has developed a mathematical theory called Integrated Information Theory, or IIT, that attempts to quantify consciousness. The theory proposes that consciousness corresponds to integrated information that can't be reduced to independent parts. The more integrated information a system has, the more conscious it is. According to IIT, consciousness isn't something special that only brains have. Any system that integrates information has some degree of consciousness. Your brain has a lot. A thermostat has a tiny amount. A rock has essentially none because its parts don't integrate information. The theory makes testable predictions about which brain states are conscious and which aren't. It's been used to assess consciousness in patients with brain injuries. And remarkably, it suggests that certain artificial systems, if they integrate information in the right way, could be conscious. But here's where it connects to quantum mechanics. Integrated information requires that the system be in a definite state. A system in quantum superposition doesn't integrate information. It's multiple possible systems simultaneously. So if consciousness requires integrated information, then consciousness requires wave function collapse. This brings us full circle. If consciousness requires collapse, and if consciousness is what collapses wave functions, then we have a self-referential loop. Consciousness creates the conditions for its own existence by collapsing quantum possibilities into definite states. This isn't a logical contradiction. It's a bootstrap. Consciousness and physical reality co-create each other through the quantum measurement process. Let me show you why this matters by taking you to a laboratory at the University of Geneva in 2008. Physicist Nicholas Geeson and his team performed an experiment that tested quantum entanglement over a distance of 18 kilometers. They created pairs of entangled photons and sent them through fiber optic cables to two villages on opposite sides of Geneva. When they measured one photon, its entangled partner instantly took on a correlated state, faster than light could travel between them. This is quantum non-locality. Einstein called it spooky action at a distance, and thought it proved quantum mechanics was incomplete. But experiment after experiment has confirmed it's real. Measure one particle, and its entangled partner instantly, quote, 22 what you measured, regardless of distance. Now here's the disturbing part. According to the mathematics, the correlation isn't established by any signal traveling between the particles. There's no hidden communication. The two particles are described by a single quantum state that doesn't factor into independent parts. They're not two separate things that happen to be correlated. They're one thing spread across space. When you measure one particle, you're not just learning about it. You're collapsing the joint wave function of both particles. Your local measurement has an instant effect on a distant particle, not because information travels between them, but because they were never truly separate to begin with. This is what quantum entanglement means, and it's not limited to photons in laboratories. Every particle that has ever interacted with another particle is, to some degree, entangled with it. The photons that bounced off your body this morning are now entangled with you. The air molecules you breathed out are entangled with your lungs. The atoms in your body were forged in stars that exploded billions of years ago, and they're still entangled with the atoms scattered across the galaxy from those same explosions. You are not a separate, isolated entity. You are a node in a vast network of quantum entanglement that spans the universe. When you observe something, when photons from an object hit your retina and trigger neural signals, you become entangled with that object. Your quantum state and its quantum state are no longer independent. You and the observed object are now part of a single, joint quantum system. This is what observation means at the quantum level. Not passive reception of information, but active entanglement. You and the universe are constantly becoming entangled with each other, constantly collapsing joint wave functions, constantly participating in the creation of definite reality from quantum possibilities. But let's scale this up even further. Let's ask what this means for the universe as a whole. In 1967, physicists Bryce DeWitt and John Wheeler developed the Wheeler-DeWitt equation, an attempt to apply quantum mechanics to the entire universe. If quantum mechanics is universal, then the universe itself should have a wave function. But this creates a paradox. Who observes the universe to collapse its wave function? There's nothing outside the universe to observe it. So either the universe is in a permanent superposition of all possible states, or something inside the universe, perhaps consciousness, collapses its wave function from within. This is called the quantum cosmology problem, and it remains unsolved. Different interpretations of quantum mechanics give different answers. In many worlds, the universe never collapses. It's in a superposition of all possible histories, and we experience just one branch. In Copenhagen, the question doesn't make sense because quantum mechanics only applies to subsystems, not the whole universe. In consciousness-based interpretations, conscious observers throughout the universe are constantly collapsing local wave functions, creating definite reality piece by piece. But there's another possibility, one that's even stranger. What if the universe's wave function is collapsing backward in time? In 1964, physicists John Cramer proposed the transactional interpretation of quantum mechanics. In this view, quantum events involve both a forward-in-time wave and a backward-in-time wave. The two waves meet at the moment of measurement, creating a, quote, 23 that makes the event definite. This sounds like science fiction, but it's based on the mathematics of quantum mechanics, which are time-symmetric. The equations work equally well forward and backward in time. Cramer's interpretation takes this symmetry seriously. If the transactional interpretation is correct, then when you observe something now, you're not just collapsing its wave function forward from the past. You're also sending a wave backward in time that helps determine what happened in the past. This connects to Wheeler's delayed choice experiment. Remember, your choice of measurement now affects what the photon did in the past. The transactional interpretation explains this by saying your measurement sends a wave backward in time that completes the transaction with the photon's forward-in-time wave. You're not changing the past. The past was always going to include your future measurement. Time isn't a simple forward flow. It's a network of forward and backward influences that create a self-consistent history. This is deeply weird, but it's consistent with the mathematics and the experiments. Now let's bring this back to consciousness. If observation involves both forward and backward time waves, and if consciousness involves observation, then your conscious experience right now is connected not just to your past, but to your future. The person you will become is, in a quantum mechanical sense, influencing the person you are now. This isn't mysticism. This is taking the time symmetry of quantum mechanics seriously. But it raises a profound question. If the future influences the past, and if consciousness involves collapsing wave functions, then is your future self observing your present self? Is the act of becoming who you will be part of what makes you who you are now? Let me show you why this question matters by taking you to a thought experiment proposed by physicist Yakir Aharonov. Imagine you're going to measure a quantum system tomorrow. Today, the system is in a superposition, but tomorrow's measurement is already determined by the laws of physics. Not which outcome you'll get, but the fact that you will measure it. According to the time-symmetric view, tomorrow's measurement is already sending a wave backward in time to today. This means the system today is not just influenced by its past, it's also influenced by its future. It's in a superposition that's constrained by both what happened before and what will happen after. Aharonov called this two-time quantum mechanics, and it makes predictions that differ slightly from standard quantum mechanics. Some of these predictions have been tested and confirmed. The future does influence the present at the quantum level. So here's the disturbing implication. Your consciousness right now, your subjective experience of this moment, is not just the result of your past. It's also constrained by your future. The observations you will make, the experiences you will have, are already sending waves backward in time that influence who you are now. You are not just becoming who you will be. Who you will be is participating in creating who you are. This is not determinism. The future isn't fixed. It's probabilistic, quantum mechanical. But the probabilities of your future are entangled with the actualities of your present. Let's make this concrete. Right now, as you process these words, quantum events are occurring in your brain. Neurotransmitters are being released. Ion channels are opening and closing. Electrons are tunneling through synaptic membranes. These are quantum mechanical processes, governed by wave functions that exist in superposition until they collapse. What collapses them? In the standard view, decoherence, interaction with the environment. But if consciousness involves observation, and if observation involves both forward and backward time waves, then your future conscious states are participating in collapsing the wave functions in your brain right now. The thought you're about to think is influencing the neural processes that will generate that thought. Not in a way that violates causality, but in a way that creates a self-consistent loop of forward and backward quantum influences. You are not a passive observer of your thoughts. You are actively participating in creating them through a quantum mechanical process that extends both forward and backward in time. This is what it means to say that observation creates reality. Not that you can wish things into existence, but that the act of conscious observation is a physical process that participates in determining what becomes actual from the field of quantum possibilities. And this process isn't limited to your brain. It extends to everything you observe. When you look at a star, photons that left that star years ago enter your eye. Those photons have been in a superposition of states during their journey. When they hit your retina, that superposition collapses. The definite color you see, the definite brightness, emerges from that collapse. But according to the delayed choice experiment, your observation now affects what state those photons were in during their journey. Not in a way that changes the past, but in a way that makes the past definite. Before your observation, the photon's history was a superposition of possibilities. Your observation selects one history and makes it real. You are, quite literally, participating in creating the history of the universe by observing it. This is not metaphor. This is the mathematical structure of quantum mechanics, confirmed by decades of experiments. But let's address the elephant in the room. If observation creates reality, why can't we observe anything we want into existence? Why can't you observe yourself as a billionaire and make it so? The answer is decoherence and entanglement. Large-scale objects, like bank accounts and bodies, are constantly being observed by their environment. Photons bounce off them. Air molecules collide with them. They're entangled with trillions of other particles. Their wave functions collapsed long ago into definite states, and those states are reinforced by continuous environmental observation. You can't uncollapse them with your observation, because your observation is just one more interaction among countless others. The system is already definite, already entangled with its environment in a way that makes it stable and classical. Quantum effects, superposition, observer-dependent reality, only dominate at small scales and in isolated systems. Once a system becomes entangled with its environment, it behaves classically. This is why you don't see chairs in superposition. Not because chairs don't follow quantum mechanics, but because they're constantly being observed by their environment. But, and this is crucial, the fact that large-scale objects behave classically doesn't mean they're not quantum mechanical. It means their quantum nature is hidden by decoherence. At the fundamental level, everything is quantum mechanical. Everything is made of particles in superposition, entangled with each other, collapsing into definite states through observation. The classical world you experience is an emergent phenomenon, arising from the quantum substrate through the process of decoherence and observation. You are living in a quantum universe that appears classical because of the constant observation happening at every scale, from every particle, in every interaction. But here's where it gets personal again. Your subjective experience, your consciousness, might be one of the few places where quantum effects can still play a role at a macroscopic scale. Because consciousness is, by its nature, private. It's not constantly being observed by the environment. Your thoughts are isolated, at least partially, from external decoherence. If quantum effects do play a role in consciousness, then your subjective experience might be one of the last bastions of quantum weirdness in the macroscopic world. Your thoughts might involve genuine quantum superpositions that collapse when you become aware of them. This would mean that the act of introspection, of becoming conscious of your own thoughts, is a quantum measurement process. You are observing your own brain states and collapsing them from superposition into definite experiences. Before you become aware of a thought, it exists as a quantum superposition of multiple possible thoughts. When you become aware of it, that superposition collapses into one definite thought. The other possibilities, the thoughts you might have had, disappear into non-existence. You are creating your subjective reality, moment by moment, through quantum observation of your own brain states. This is speculation. We don't know if consciousness involves quantum effects, but if it does, this is what it would mean. And it would mean that you are not just observing reality, you are participating in creating your experience of reality through a quantum mechanical process that makes definite what was previously indefinite. Let me take you to one final experiment that will tie all of this together. In 2015, physicists at Griffith University in Australia performed an experiment that created a photograph of quantum entanglement. They entangled two photons, separated them, and captured an image showing the correlations between their positions. For the first time, humans could see entanglement, not just measure it, but actually see it in a photograph. The image shows something that looks like noise, but it's not random. The noise in one region is perfectly correlated with the noise in another region. The two photons, though separated in space, are dancing together in perfect synchrony. They're not two independent things, they're one thing, spread across space, maintaining their connection despite the distance. This is what entanglement looks like. And it's what you look like at the quantum level. You are not a collection of independent particles. You are a pattern of entanglement, a network of quantum correlations that extends throughout your body and beyond. The atoms in your left hand are entangled with the atoms in your right hand. The neurons in your brain are entangled with each other. You are, in a very real sense, a single quantum system, not a collection of separate parts. And you're entangled with the world around you. The photons you see are entangled with your retina. The air you breathe is entangled with your lungs. The food you eat becomes entangled with your body. You are constantly exchanging quantum information with your environment, constantly becoming entangled with the universe. This is what it means to be a physical being in a quantum universe. You are not separate from reality. You are woven into it at the most fundamental level. And when you observe something, when you become conscious of it, you're not just passively receiving information, you're becoming entangled with it. You're collapsing joint wave functions. You're participating in the quantum mechanical process that creates definite reality from the field of possibilities. This is the observer effect, not a mystical power to manifest reality with your thoughts, but a physical process of quantum entanglement and wave function collapse that makes you an active participant in creating the reality you experience. You are not outside the universe looking in. You are inside it, entangled with it, observing it from within, and through that observation, participating in making it real. The universe is not a stage on which you act. It's a collaborative process in which observation and reality co-create each other, moment by moment, through the strange and beautiful mathematics of quantum mechanics. And that process is happening right now, in your brain, as you read these words and become conscious of these ideas. Quantum possibilities are collapsing into definite thoughts. Wave functions are being observed and made real. You are creating your experience of this moment through a quantum mechanical process that connects you to the fundamental nature of reality itself. This is not the end of the story. This is where the story gets even stranger. In 2022, a team of physicists at the University of Science and Technology of China achieved something that should be impossible. They created quantum entanglement between a single photon and 1 trillion atoms in a cloud of rubidium gas. One photon, 1 trillion atoms, entangled, moving as a single quantum system. The scale of this achievement is staggering. A trillion is a number your brain can't really grasp. If you counted 1 atom per second, it would take you 31,000 years to count to 1 trillion. And yet, all trillion atoms were quantum mechanically connected to a single photon, their states correlated in a way that cannot be explained by any classical physics. But here's what should make your skin crawl. Those trillion atoms weren't just entangled with the photon, they were entangled with each other. The entire cloud was a single quantum system, described by one wave function. Not a trillion separate things, but one thing with a trillion parts, all moving in quantum lockstep. Now, scale this up to your brain. Your brain contains approximately 86 billion neurons. Each neuron contains roughly 100 trillion atoms. That's 8.6 sextillion atoms in your brain. 8.6 followed by 21 zeros. And every single one of those atoms is, to some degree, entangled with the others. You are not 86 billion separate neurons. You are not 8.6 sextillion separate atoms. You are one quantum system, impossibly complex, with correlations spanning every scale from individual electrons to the entire 3-pound universe inside your skull. When you have a thought, it's not happening in one neuron. It's not even happening in one region. It's a pattern of quantum correlations spanning millions of neurons, billions of synapses, trillions of molecules. And if quantum effects play any role in consciousness, if Penrose and Hameroff are even partially correct, then that pattern includes quantum superpositions that exist until the moment you become aware of them. Let me show you why this matters by taking you deeper into what we know about quantum biology. In 1977, a young physicist named Graham Fleming began studying photosynthesis using ultra-fast laser spectroscopy. He wanted to understand how plants convert light into chemical energy with nearly 100% efficiency. What he discovered would eventually revolutionize our understanding of quantum mechanics in biological systems. Fleming found that when a photon hits a chlorophyll molecule in a plant cell, the energy doesn't travel through the molecule like a ball rolling down a hill. Instead, it exists in a quantum superposition, simultaneously exploring all possible paths through the molecular structure. The energy wave function spreads out, tests every route, and then collapses into the most efficient path. This is quantum coherence in a living system, at room temperature, in a wet, noisy biological environment. It shouldn't be possible. Decoherence should destroy the superposition in femtoseconds. But plants have evolved molecular structures that protect quantum coherence long enough to achieve near-perfect energy transfer. In 2007, Fleming's team published direct evidence of this quantum coherence in the journal Nature. They showed that photosynthetic complexes maintain quantum superposition for hundreds of femtoseconds, long enough to explore multiple pathways simultaneously and find the optimal route. This was the first solid evidence that life uses quantum mechanics not just at the level of individual particles, but as a functional tool for biological processes. Then, the floodgates opened. In 2011, researchers discovered quantum effects in bird navigation. European robins can sense Earth's magnetic field to navigate during migration. The mechanism involves a protein called cryptochrome in the bird's eye. When light hits this protein, it creates a pair of entangled electrons. Earth's magnetic field affects the spin states of these entangled electrons, and somehow, we still don't fully understand how, the bird's brain can detect this quantum effect and use it to determine direction. Birds are using quantum entanglement to navigate, not in a laboratory at near absolute zero, but in their eyes, at body temperature, while flying through turbulent air. In 2016, a study in the Journal of the Royal Society Interface found evidence of quantum effects in enzyme catalysis. Enzymes are proteins that speed up chemical reactions in your body. Some enzymes work by quantum tunneling, allowing particles to pass through energy barriers they classically couldn't cross. This isn't rare, it's fundamental to how life works. Every breath you take involves quantum tunneling. The enzymes that break down food in your stomach use quantum effects. The DNA in every cell in your body is held together by quantum mechanical forces and is constantly experiencing quantum fluctuations. You are not a classical machine. You are a quantum biological system, using quantum effects at every level of organization. But the most controversial question remains, does consciousness itself involve quantum effects? In 2020, physicist Matthew Fisher published a paper in Annals of Physics proposing a specific mechanism for quantum processing in the brain. He focused on phosphorus nuclei in Posner molecules, clusters of calcium phosphate that form in the brain. Fisher's calculations showed that these molecules could maintain quantum entanglement for up to 1 day, protected from decoherence by their unique molecular structure. 1 day. In the warm, wet, noisy environment of the brain. That's an eternity in quantum terms. Fisher proposed that these entangled Posner molecules could influence neurotransmitter release at synapses. When a Posner molecule breaks apart, it releases calcium ions that trigger neurotransmitter release. If two Posner molecules are entangled, their breakup would be correlated, causing synchronized neurotransmitter release at distant synapses. This would create non-local correlations in brain activity, neurons firing in sync, not because of classical signals traveling between them, but because of quantum entanglement. Your thoughts would involve genuine quantum correlations spanning different regions of your brain. This is still highly speculative. Most neuroscientists remain skeptical. But Fisher's mechanism is testable. Experiments are being designed to look for the quantum signatures he predicts. If he's right, then consciousness involves quantum entanglement. Your subjective experience would be, quite literally, a quantum phenomenon. The unity of consciousness, the fact that you experience yourself as one integrated self rather than a collection of separate processes, might be explained by quantum entanglement binding different brain regions into a single quantum system. You would be, in a very real sense, a quantum computer made of meat. But let's push this further. Let's ask what quantum consciousness would mean for the observer effect. If your consciousness involves quantum processes, then the act of becoming conscious, of paying attention, of focusing awareness, would involve collapsing quantum wave functions in your brain. Not in the external world, but in the neural substrate of your experience. Before you become aware of a thought, multiple possible thoughts exist in quantum superposition in your brain. When you become aware, that superposition collapses. One thought becomes actual, the others vanish. This is not metaphor. If consciousness is quantum mechanical, this is literally what happens. And here's where it gets disturbing. If thoughts exist in superposition before you're aware of them, then what determines which thought becomes actual when you pay attention? The standard answer in quantum mechanics is, it's random. The collapse is probabilistic. You can calculate the probability of each outcome, but you can't predict which one will occur. There's genuine randomness at the heart of reality. But is it really random? Or does consciousness itself, the act of becoming aware, play a role in selecting which possibility becomes actual? This is the question that physicist Henry Stapp has spent decades exploring. Stapp argues that consciousness is not just a passive observer of quantum collapse, it's an active participant. When you focus your attention, you're not just observing which thought emerges from superposition, you're influencing which thought emerges. Not in a way that violates the probabilistic laws of quantum mechanics. You can't force a specific outcome. But you can, through the act of attention, bias the probabilities. You can make certain thoughts more likely to emerge from superposition than others. This is not mysticism. Stapp's proposal is based on a rigorous interpretation of quantum mechanics developed by John von Neumann in the 1930s. Von Neumann showed that quantum mechanics requires three distinct processes: the smooth evolution of the wave function, the random collapse during measurement, and the choice of what to measure. That third process, the choice of what to measure, is where consciousness enters. You can't control the outcome of a quantum measurement, but you can choose what to measure. And in the context of your own thoughts, choosing what to pay attention to is choosing what to measure. When you focus your attention on a problem, you're choosing to measure certain aspects of your brain's quantum state. That choice influences which thoughts are likely to emerge from superposition. You're not creating thoughts out of nothing, but you're participating in selecting which of the many possible thoughts your brain is generating actually becomes conscious. This is free will at the quantum level. Not the ability to violate the laws of physics, but the ability to participate in the quantum measurement process that determines which possibilities become actual. Let me show you why this matters by taking you to a specific moment in your life. Think back to a decision you made, a real decision, where you genuinely didn't know what to choose. Maybe it was a career choice, a relationship decision, a moral dilemma. Remember that moment of uncertainty, that feeling of multiple possibilities hanging in the balance. What was happening in your brain at that moment? From a classical neuroscience perspective, your brain was processing information, weighing options, running simulations of possible futures. Eventually, one option won out, and you made your choice. The decision was determined by the prior state of your brain, which was determined by your past experiences, which were determined by your genetics and environment. No free will, just deterministic computation. But from a quantum perspective, something else might have been happening. Your brain was in a superposition of multiple possible decision states. Different neural patterns, corresponding to different choices, existed simultaneously in quantum superposition. When you focused your attention, when you became conscious of your decision, that superposition collapsed. One choice became actual. The collapse was probabilistic, influenced by all the factors neuroscience identifies: your past experiences, your values, your emotional state. But it wasn't deterministic. There was genuine quantum randomness in which possibility became actual. And here's the crucial part. Your act of attention, of becoming conscious of the decision, was part of the measurement process that collapsed the superposition. You weren't just observing which choice your brain made. You were participating in making the choice through the quantum measurement process. This is not the free will of philosophy, the ability to choose independently of all prior causes. This is quantum free will, the ability to participate in the probabilistic collapse that determines which of many possible futures becomes actual. You can't control the outcome. But you're not just a passive observer either. You're an active participant in the quantum process that creates your decisions. This is what it means to say that observation creates reality at the quantum level. Not that you can wish things into existence, but that the act of conscious observation is part of the physical process that determines what becomes actual from the field of quantum possibilities. Now let's scale this up to the level of identity. Who are you? Not philosophically, but physically. What makes you the same person you were yesterday or 10 years ago? Your body has completely replaced most of its atoms in the past 7 years. The molecules in your cells are constantly being broken down and rebuilt. Even your neurons, which last your entire life, are constantly replacing their component molecules. The atoms that make up your brain today are not the same atoms that made up your brain a decade ago. So what persists? What makes you you? The standard answer is patterns. You are a pattern of information, encoded in the structure of your brain and body. The atoms change, but the pattern persists. You are software running on hardware that's constantly being replaced. But if consciousness involves quantum effects, then you're not just a pattern of classical information. You're a pattern of quantum correlations, entanglements between particles that span your entire brain and body. And quantum entanglement is not like classical correlation. When two particles are entangled, they're not just correlated. They're described by a single quantum state that doesn't factor into independent parts. They're not two things that happen to be related. They're one thing, spread across space. If your consciousness involves quantum entanglement, then you are not a collection of separate neurons that happen to be connected. You are a single quantum system, with correlations that span your entire brain. The unity of your consciousness, the fact that you experience yourself as one integrated self, is not an illusion created by information processing. It's a physical fact, grounded in quantum entanglement. You are, quite literally, one thing. Not metaphorically one, but quantum mechanically one. But here's where it gets strange. Quantum entanglement can persist even when particles are separated. The photons in the Geneva experiment remained entangled across 18 kilometers. The atoms in your body that were once part of the food you ate are still, to some tiny degree, entangled with the atoms in the plants or animals that food came from. You are not just entangled with yourself. You're entangled with your environment, with your past, with everything you've ever interacted with. The boundary between you and the world is not sharp. It's fuzzy, quantum mechanical, defined by the degree of entanglement rather than by any clear physical separation. This is not mysticism. This is the mathematical structure of quantum mechanics applied to biological systems. And it means that when you observe the world, you're not just becoming entangled with what you observe. You're strengthening entanglements that already exist. You're making explicit what was implicit. You're collapsing superpositions that span the boundary between you and the world. Let me take you to an experiment that demonstrates this in the starkest possible terms. In 2019, physicists at the University of Glasgow created a photograph of quantum entanglement between photons that had never interacted. They used a technique called Quote 25 to entangle photons from two different sources. These photons had never been in the same place, never interacted, never had any causal contact. Yet they were entangled. How is this possible? The answer reveals something profound about the nature of quantum reality. Entanglement is not created by interaction. It's revealed by interaction. At the fundamental level, everything in the universe is potentially entangled with everything else. What we call separate particles are just local excitations of quantum fields that span all of space. When particles interact, they don't create entanglement. They make manifest the entanglement that was always there, latent in the structure of the quantum fields. You are not separate from the universe. You never were. You are a local pattern in quantum fields that extend everywhere. Your apparent separateness is an illusion created by decoherence, the constant interaction with your environment that makes you appear classical, localized, distinct. But at the quantum level, you are continuous with everything. The atoms in your body are excitations of the same quantum fields that make up the stars. The electrons in your neurons are indistinguishable from the electrons in the device you're using to read this. There is no fundamental boundary between you and the rest of reality. When you observe something, you're not reaching across a gap to interact with something separate from you. You're making explicit the quantum connections that already exist. You're collapsing superpositions that span the apparent boundary between observer and observed. This is what the observer effect really means. Not that consciousness has magical powers, but that observation is a physical process that makes manifest the quantum connections that constitute reality. Now let's address the skepticism that should be building in your mind. This all sounds too convenient, too much like quantum mechanics is being used to justify mystical beliefs about consciousness and reality. How do we know any of this is true? What's the evidence? Let's be absolutely clear. Most of what I've just described is speculative. We don't know if consciousness involves quantum effects. We don't know if quantum entanglement plays a role in the unity of conscious experience. We don't know if the observer effect extends to conscious observation in any special way. What we do know, with absolute certainty, confirmed by thousands of experiments over nearly a century, is this. 1. Quantum systems exist in superposition until measured. This is not interpretation dependent. It's a mathematical fact confirmed by every quantum experiment ever performed. 2. Measurement collapses superposition into definite states. Again, not interpretation dependent. The collapse happens. We can argue about what it means, but we can't argue about whether it happens. 3. The act of measurement, of extracting information from a quantum system, fundamentally changes that system. This is the observer effect, and it's as well established as any fact in physics. 4. Quantum entanglement is real. Particles can be correlated in ways that cannot be explained by any classical mechanism. This has been tested over and over with increasingly sophisticated experiments, and it always holds. 5. Quantum effects occur in biological systems. Photosynthesis, bird navigation, enzyme catalysis. These are not speculative. They're documented, peer-reviewed, replicated findings. What's speculative is whether consciousness itself involves quantum effects, and whether conscious observation plays any special role in wave function collapse. The honest answer is, we don't know. The experiments haven't been done, or they've been done, but the results are ambiguous, or they've been done, but they're not widely accepted. But here's what we can say. The possibility is not ruled out. The mathematics of quantum mechanics allows for consciousness to play a role. The biology of the brain doesn't forbid quantum effects. The experiments that have been attempted show hints, suggestions, tantalizing possibilities. We're at the edge of what science currently knows, and that edge is a fascinating place to be. Let me show you why by taking you to the cutting edge of current research. In 2023, a team at the University of Cambridge published a paper in Physical Review X proposing a new experimental test for quantum effects in consciousness. They suggested using quantum probes, individual atoms or molecules with quantum properties that can be precisely controlled, to interact with neurons and detect whether quantum coherence exists in neural processes. The experiment hasn't been performed yet. It requires technology that's just now becoming available. But within the next 5 to 10 years, we should have an answer. Either quantum coherence plays a role in neural processing, or it doesn't. Either consciousness involves quantum effects, or it's purely classical. This is how science works. We don't know the answer yet, but we're designing experiments to find out. We're not just speculating, we're testing. And here's what makes this moment in history so exciting. For the first time, we have the technology to actually test whether consciousness involves quantum mechanics. For a century, this question was purely philosophical. Now it's becoming experimental. Whatever the answer turns out to be, it will be profound. If consciousness is purely classical, then we need to explain how classical information processing gives rise to subjective experience. The hard problem of consciousness remains, but we can rule out quantum explanations. If consciousness involves quantum effects, then we need to completely revise our understanding of what consciousness is. It's not just information processing. It's quantum information processing, with all the strange properties that entails: superposition, entanglement, non-locality. Either way, we're about to learn something fundamental about the nature of mind and reality. But let's return to the observer effect, because there's one more layer we need to explore. I've been talking about observation as if it's something that happens at a moment in time. You observe, the wave function collapses, reality becomes definite. But quantum mechanics is time-symmetric. The equations work equally well forward and backward in time. So what if observation doesn't just collapse the wave function forward from the past? What if it also constrains the wave function backward into the past? This is the implication of Wheeler's delayed choice experiment and the transactional interpretation. Your observation now doesn't just determine what happens next. It participates in determining what happened before. Not in a way that changes the past, that would create paradoxes, but in a way that makes the past definite. Before your observation, the past was a superposition of possibilities. Your observation selects one history and makes it actual. This is not science fiction. This is what the mathematics of quantum mechanics implies, and what experiments like the delayed choice experiment confirm. And if this is true, then the implications for consciousness are staggering. Your conscious experience right now is not just the result of your past. It's also constrained by your future. The observations you will make, the experiences you will have, are already sending quantum influences backward in time that shape who you are now. You are not just becoming who you will be. Who you will be is participating in creating who you are. This is not determinism. The future is not fixed. It's probabilistic, quantum mechanical. But the probabilities of your future are entangled with the actualities of your present. Let me make this concrete with a thought experiment. Imagine you're about to make an important decision tomorrow. Today, you're uncertain. Multiple possibilities exist. From a classical perspective, your decision tomorrow will be determined by your brain state today, which is determined by your past. But from a quantum perspective, your decision tomorrow is already sending influences backward in time to today. Not determining what you'll decide, that's still probabilistic, but constraining the superposition of possible brain states you're in today. Your future self is, in a quantum mechanical sense, observing your present self. And that observation is collapsing the superposition of who you might be into a more definite state that's consistent with who you will become. You are not just a forward-moving process, becoming who you will be. You are a time-extended quantum system, with correlations that span your past, present, and future. Your identity is not located at a single moment in time. It's spread across your entire timeline, held together by quantum correlations that extend both forward and backward. This is what it means to be a quantum being in a time-symmetric universe. You are not just in time, you are of time, extended through it, with your past and future quantum mechanically entangled. And when you observe something, when you become conscious of an experience, you're not just collapsing the wave function of that moment. You're collapsing a wave function that extends through time, making definite not just the present, but also the past and future. This is the deepest meaning of the observer effect. Observation doesn't just create reality in the present. It participates in creating reality across time, making definite what was indefinite, actualizing what was potential, weaving the fabric of space-time itself through the act of conscious awareness. You are not separate from reality, observing it from outside. You are woven into the quantum structure of space-time, participating in its creation through every observation, every measurement, every moment of conscious awareness. This is not mysticism. This is physics. Strange physics, uncomfortable physics, physics that challenges everything you thought you knew about the nature of reality and your place in it. But it's physics nonetheless. Grounded in mathematics, confirmed by experiments, tested and retested for nearly a century. And it's telling us something profound. Reality is not a fixed stage on which you act. It's a participatory process in which observation and existence co-create each other, moment by moment, through the strange and beautiful mathematics of quantum mechanics. You are not just in the universe. You are of the universe, quantum mechanically entangled with it, observing it from within, and through that observation, participating in making it real. Every thought you think, every observation you make, every moment of conscious awareness is a quantum measurement that collapses possibilities into actualities, that makes definite what was indefinite, that participates in creating the reality you experience. This is what it means to be conscious in a quantum universe. Not that you have magical powers to manifest reality with your thoughts, but that consciousness itself is a quantum process that participates in the fundamental structure of reality. And that process is happening right now, as you read these words, as quantum superpositions in your brain collapse into definite thoughts, as you become entangled with these ideas, as your observation makes them real in your experience. You are not passively receiving information, you are actively participating in creating your experience through a quantum mechanical process that connects you to the deepest nature of reality itself. This is the observer effect. This is quantum mechanics. This is what it means to be you. I understand perfectly what you're thinking right now. This sounds like exactly the kind of quantum mysticism that serious scientists spend their careers fighting against. The secret dressed up in Schrödinger equations. Deepak Chopra with a physics degree. And you're right to be skeptical. Let me be absolutely clear about what we know and what we don't know. Because the line between legitimate quantum physics and pseudoscientific nonsense is razor thin, and crossing it has real consequences. Here's what we know with certainty. Quantum mechanics works. It's the most precisely tested theory in the history of science. The predictions of quantum electrodynamics have been confirmed to 1 part in 10 billion. Your smartphone, your computer, your LED lights, they all work because quantum mechanics is correct. No serious physicist doubts the mathematics. Here's what we don't know. What quantum mechanics means. How does superposition become definite reality? What role, if any, does consciousness play? Is the wave function real or just a mathematical tool? These questions remain genuinely open, debated by the world's leading physicists, with no consensus in sight. And here's what we absolutely, definitively know is false. You cannot manifest a parking space by thinking quantum thoughts. You cannot heal cancer with positive vibrations. You cannot change your bank account by visualizing abundance. Anyone who tells you otherwise is either lying or profoundly confused about what quantum mechanics actually says. The observer effect does not mean your thoughts create reality in any magical sense. It means that measurement, physical interaction that extracts information, affects quantum systems. A detector is an observer. A photon bouncing off an electron is an observer. Consciousness is not required. But, and this is crucial, that doesn't mean consciousness is irrelevant to quantum mechanics. It means we need to be extraordinarily careful about what claims we make and what evidence we require. So let me show you where the genuine scientific mystery lies and why it matters. In 2024, a team at the Max Planck Institute for Quantum Optics performed an experiment that pushed the boundaries of quantum measurement theory. They created a quantum system that could be measured in 2 incompatible ways, like measuring position or momentum, where measuring one destroys information about the other. But they added a twist. They let an artificial intelligence system choose which measurement to make. The AI wasn't conscious. It was just an algorithm running on a classical computer. But it was making choices based on previous measurement results, adapting its strategy to extract maximum information from the quantum system. Here's what they found. The AI's choices affected the quantum system in ways that couldn't be explained by the standard Copenhagen interpretation. The system seemed to anticipate which measurement would be made, even though the AI's decision was based on quantum random number generators and couldn't be predicted in advance. This doesn't prove consciousness is special, but it shows that the act of choosing what to measure, even by a non-conscious system, has physical consequences that go beyond the simple collapse of the wave function. The choice itself is part of the quantum process. Now scale this to your brain. Every moment, your neural systems are making choices about what to pay attention to, what information to process, what signals to amplify, and what to suppress. If these choices involve quantum measurements, and we don't know if they do, but they might, then your attention is not just observing your thoughts. It's participating in creating them through the quantum measurement process. This is not mysticism. This is a legitimate scientific question about the role of choice in quantum mechanics, applied to the specific case of neural information processing. But let's go deeper into why this question has been so hard to answer. The problem is that consciousness is private. I can measure the quantum state of a photon. I can measure the quantum state of an atom. I can even measure the quantum state of a superconducting circuit with billions of atoms. But I can't measure your subjective experience. I can measure your brain activity, but I can't directly access what it feels like to be you. This creates a fundamental experimental challenge. If consciousness involves quantum effects, how would we know? What would we measure? In 2025, neuroscientist Christoph Koch and physicist Johannes Kleiner proposed a potential solution. They suggested using quantum sensors, ultra-sensitive devices that can detect tiny magnetic fields, to look for quantum coherence in living brain tissue. Not in extracted neurons in a dish, but in functioning brains, in real time, during conscious experience. The technology exists. The experiments are being designed. Within the next few years, we'll have data. Either quantum coherence exists in functioning neural tissue during conscious processing, or it doesn't. Either consciousness involves quantum effects, or it's purely classical. But here's what makes this moment so critical. We're not just testing a theory about consciousness. We're testing something fundamental about the nature of reality itself. If consciousness is purely classical, then the observer effect has nothing to do with awareness. Measurement is just physical interaction, and consciousness is an emergent property of classical computation. The universe doesn't need observers to be real. It just is, independent of anyone experiencing it. But if consciousness involves quantum effects, if awareness itself is a quantum process, then the observer effect takes on new meaning. Consciousness wouldn't just be something that happens in the universe. It would be part of the mechanism by which the universe becomes definite, by which possibilities collapse into actualities. Not because consciousness is magical, but because consciousness is physical. And if it's quantum mechanical, then it participates in the quantum measurement process that creates definite reality. Let me show you why this matters by taking you to the largest scale possible. In 2023, the James Webb Space Telescope captured an image of galaxies that formed just 300 million years after the Big Bang. The light from these galaxies has been traveling for more than 13 billion years. When that light left those galaxies, Earth didn't exist. The Sun didn't exist. The Milky Way was still forming. That light has been traveling through space as a quantum wave function, in superposition, for 13 billion years. And then it hit the telescope's detector. And the wave function collapsed. The photons that had been in superposition for longer than Earth has existed suddenly became definite. Now here's the question that should make you uncomfortable. What was the state of those photons during their 13 billion year journey? Were they in a definite state, following a definite path? Or were they in superposition, simultaneously taking all possible paths through the expanding universe? According to the delayed choice experiment, the answer depends on how we measure them. If we measure them in a way that detects which path they took, they have a definite history. If we measure them in a way that allows interference, they took all paths simultaneously. Our measurement now, today, determines what those photons were doing for 13 billion years. Not in a way that changes the past is consistent with all other observations, but in a way that makes the past definite. Before our measurement, the photon's history was a superposition of possibilities. Our measurement selected one history and made it actual. This is not interpretation. This is what the mathematics of quantum mechanics says and what experiments confirm. The past is not fixed until it's observed. Now scale this to the universe as a whole. The cosmic microwave background, the afterglow of the Big Bang, is still reaching us from all directions. That radiation has been traveling for 13.8 billion years, since the universe was just 380,000 years old. It's in superposition until we measure it. Every time we point a telescope at the sky, we're collapsing wave functions that have been evolving since the beginning of time. We're making definite what was indefinite. We're participating in creating the history of the universe by observing it. This is not mysticism. This is the straightforward application of quantum mechanics to cosmology. And it leads to a profound conclusion. The history of the universe is not fixed. It's a superposition of possibilities that becomes definite through observation. But observation by what? By whom? If consciousness is required for observation, and we don't know if it is, then the universe needed conscious observers to become definite. Not to exist, but to become actual rather than potential. The universe before conscious observers would have been a vast superposition of all possible histories, none more real than any other. The emergence of consciousness, whenever and wherever it happened, would have been the moment when the universe began to collapse from superposition into definite reality. Not just going forward, but backward in time, making definite the entire history that led to that first moment of awareness. This is called the participatory anthropic principle, proposed by John Wheeler in the 1980s. The universe doesn't just create observers. Observers participate in creating the universe by collapsing its quantum wave function through observation. Most physicists find this idea uncomfortable. It sounds too much like the universe needs us, like we're special, like consciousness has cosmic significance. And maybe that's just human ego talking, but the mathematics doesn't care about our comfort. If quantum mechanics applies to the universe as a whole, and if observation collapses wave functions, then something has to be doing the observing. Either consciousness, or the environment, or the universe observing itself through some mechanism we don't understand. Let me show you why this question matters by taking you to the very edge of what physics can currently say. In 2026, a team of theoretical physicists at the Perimeter Institute published a paper proposing a new interpretation of quantum mechanics called quantum Bayesianism with objective collapse, or QBO. It attempts to bridge the gap between consciousness-based interpretations and objective collapse theories. The idea is this: consciousness is not required for wave function collapse, but it's sufficient. Physical interactions cause collapse through decoherence. That's the objective part. But conscious observation also causes collapse through a different mechanism. That's the Bayesian part. Both processes happen, and they're compatible. In this view, the universe is constantly collapsing from superposition through environmental decoherence. But conscious observers add something extra. They collapse wave functions in a way that integrates information, that creates meaning, that transforms raw physical data into subjective experience. The universe doesn't need consciousness to be real, but consciousness adds a layer of reality, subjective reality, experiential reality, that wouldn't exist otherwise. The universe without consciousness would be a vast collection of quantum states collapsing through decoherence. The universe with consciousness is that plus something more. The experience of those states, the feeling of what it's like to be a pattern of information processing quantum collapse. This interpretation hasn't been widely adopted yet. It's too new, too speculative. But it represents a serious attempt to take both the physics and the phenomenology seriously, to find a middle ground between quote 28 and quote 29. And it suggests an answer to the question we've been circling. Does observation create reality? The answer is yes and no. No, in the sense that physical reality exists and evolves according to quantum mechanics, whether or not anyone is conscious of it. Decoherence happens. Wave functions collapse. The universe is real. But yes, in the sense that conscious observation adds something that wouldn't exist otherwise. Subjective experience, meaning, the feeling of what it's like to be a part of the universe becoming aware of itself. That's real too, and it's created by observation. You are not creating the external world with your thoughts, but you are creating your experience of the world through a quantum mechanical process that transforms physical states into subjective awareness. Let me make this concrete by bringing it back to your brain, right now, as you process these words. Photons from your screen are hitting your retina. Those photons are in superposition until they interact with rhodopsin molecules in your photoreceptor cells. That interaction collapses their wave function. The definite pattern of light you see emerges from that collapse. But that's just the beginning. The electrical signals from your retina travel to your visual cortex. Neurons fire in patterns that represent edges, colors, shapes. Those patterns are processed by higher brain regions that recognize letters, words, meanings. And somewhere in that cascade of neural processing, you become conscious of these ideas. What happens at that moment of becoming conscious? If consciousness involves quantum effects, then quantum superpositions in your brain, multiple possible interpretations, multiple possible thoughts, collapse into one definite experience. The thought you're having right now. You didn't choose which thought to have in any simple sense. The collapse is probabilistic, influenced by your past experiences, your current context, your neural state. But you're not just passively observing which thought emerges. Your attention, your conscious awareness, is part of the measurement process that collapses the superposition. You are participating in creating your experience through a quantum mechanical process. Not creating it from nothing, but selecting which of many possible experiences becomes actual. This is what the observer effect means for consciousness. Not that you can manifest external reality with your thoughts, but that you participate in manifesting your internal reality, your subjective experience, through the quantum measurement process of becoming aware. And here's why this matters. If this is true, then consciousness is not just a passive mirror of reality. It's an active process that participates in determining what becomes real in your experience. You are not just receiving information about the world. You are creating your experience of the world through the act of observation. But let's be absolutely clear about the limits of this claim. You cannot change the external world by thinking about it. The photons hitting your retina have definite properties determined by the light source, not by your thoughts. The words on this screen have definite meanings determined by language and context, not by your wishes. The physical universe exists and evolves according to laws that don't care about your consciousness. What you can influence, maybe, if consciousness involves quantum effects, is which aspects of reality you become aware of, which interpretations you give to ambiguous information, which thoughts emerge from the quantum superposition of possible thoughts in your brain. This is not a small thing. Your subjective experience is your reality. The world you experience is the only world you have direct access to. If consciousness participates in creating that experience through quantum measurement, then you are, in a very real sense, participating in creating your reality. Not the external physical reality, but your experiential reality. And that's the only reality you ever directly know. Let me show you why this distinction matters by taking you to a final thought experiment. Imagine two people looking at the same sunset. The photons hitting their retinas are the same. The wavelengths, the intensities, the patterns, all identical. But their experiences are different. One person sees beauty, feels awe, experiences a moment of transcendence. The other sees electromagnetic radiation, thinks about atmospheric scattering, experiences intellectual curiosity. Same physical input, different subjective experiences. What creates the difference? The standard answer is, their brains process the information differently based on their past experiences, their current mood, their cognitive frameworks. All classical, all deterministic, all reducible to neural computation. But if consciousness involves quantum effects, there's another possibility. The quantum superposition of possible experiences in each brain collapses differently. Not randomly, but probabilistically, influenced by all those classical factors but not determined by them. There's genuine quantum indeterminacy in which experience emerges. And the act of becoming conscious, of paying attention, of focusing awareness, participates in that collapse. Each person's attention selects which of many possible experiences becomes actual in their awareness. They're not creating the sunset, but they are participating in creating their experience of the sunset through a quantum measurement process that makes definite what was indefinite. This is the deepest meaning of the observer effect applied to consciousness. Not that observation creates external reality, but that observation participates in creating experiential reality through the quantum mechanical process of wave function collapse. And if this is true, if consciousness is quantum mechanical, then every moment of awareness is a moment of creation. Not creation from nothing, but creation of definiteness from possibility, of actuality from potentiality, of experience from the quantum substrate of reality. You are not just in the universe passively observing it. You are of the universe, quantum mechanically entangled with it, participating in the process by which it becomes definite through the act of conscious observation. This is not mysticism. This is a legitimate scientific hypothesis about the nature of consciousness and its relationship to quantum mechanics. We don't know if it's true. The experiments haven't been done, or they've been done but the results are ambiguous. But the possibility is real. And if it turns out to be true, it will transform our understanding of what it means to be conscious, what it means to observe, what it means to be human in a quantum universe. Because it would mean that consciousness is not just an accident of evolution, not just a useful trick for processing information. It would be a fundamental feature of how reality becomes actual, how the quantum universe of possibilities crystallizes into the definite universe of experience. You would be, quite literally, a participant in the creation of reality. Not the creator, you don't control the process, but a participant through the quantum mechanical act of observation that collapses possibilities into actualities. Every thought you think, every observation you make, every moment of conscious awareness would be a quantum measurement that participates in making definite what was indefinite, that selects one reality from many possible realities, that creates your experience from the quantum substrate of possibility. This is what it might mean to be conscious in a quantum universe. Not that you have magical powers, but that consciousness itself is a quantum process that participates in the fundamental structure of reality. And that process is happening right now as you read these words, as quantum superpositions in your brain collapse into definite thoughts, as you become aware of these ideas, as your observation makes them real in your experience. You are not passively receiving information. You are actively participating in creating your experience through a quantum mechanical process that connects you to the deepest nature of reality itself. But we don't know if this is true. And that uncertainty, that gap between what we know and what we don't know, is where the real story lies. Because science is not about certainty. It's about the process of moving from uncertainty to knowledge, from speculation to understanding, from possibility to actuality. And right now, we're at a unique moment in that process. For the first time in history, we have the technology to test whether consciousness involves quantum effects. The experiments are being designed. The measurements are being planned. Within the next decade, we'll have answers. Either consciousness is purely classical, and the observer effect has nothing special to do with awareness, or consciousness involves quantum mechanics, and awareness is part of the process by which reality becomes definite. Either way, we're about to learn something profound about the nature of mind and reality. And that's what makes this moment so extraordinary. We're not just studying quantum mechanics, we're not just studying consciousness. We're studying the relationship between observation and reality, between mind and matter, between the subjective and the objective. We're asking questions that philosophers have debated for millennia, but now we're asking them with mathematics and experiments and testable predictions. This is science at its best, rigorous, skeptical, demanding evidence, but also bold, imaginative, willing to follow the mathematics wherever it leads, even if it leads to conclusions that challenge our intuitions about the nature of reality. And the mathematics of quantum mechanics, confirmed by a century of experiments, is telling us something strange. Observation matters. Measurement changes systems. The act of extracting information from the quantum world affects that world in fundamental ways. Whether consciousness plays a special role in that process remains an open question. But the question itself is legitimate, scientific, worthy of serious investigation. And the answer, whatever it turns out to be, will reshape our understanding of what it means to be a conscious observer in a quantum universe. You are living through this moment of discovery. The experiments that will answer these questions are happening now, in laboratories around the world. The theories are being refined. The technology is advancing. The answers are coming. And when they arrive, they will tell us something fundamental about who we are, what consciousness is, and how observation relates to reality. They will tell us whether the observer effect extends to conscious awareness, or whether consciousness is just another classical process in a quantum world. But regardless of the answer, one thing is already clear. You are not separate from the reality you observe. You are part of it, entangled with it, interacting with it at every moment. Your observations are physical processes that affect the systems you observe, even if that effect is just the mundane decoherence of quantum states through environmental interaction. You are not outside the universe looking in. You are inside it, made of it, participating in it through every observation, every measurement, every moment of awareness. And that participation, whether quantum or classical, makes you an integral part of the process by which the universe knows itself. This is not the end of the story. This is where the story opens up into questions we're only beginning to ask, experiments we're only beginning to perform, understanding we're only beginning to achieve. The relationship between consciousness and quantum mechanics remains one of the deepest mysteries in science, and we're living in the era when that mystery might finally be solved. But let's step back from the laboratories and the mathematics for a moment. Let's ask a different kind of question. Not what quantum mechanics tells us about consciousness, but what consciousness tells us about our place in reality. Because here's what we know for certain. Regardless of whether consciousness involves quantum effects, you are the universe becoming aware of itself. Think about what that means. The atoms in your body were forged in the cores of dying stars billions of years ago. The carbon in your cells, the oxygen you breathe, the calcium in your bones, all of it was created in stellar furnaces, scattered across space in supernova explosions, gathered into clouds of gas and dust, collapsed into a new solar system, assembled into a planet, organized into increasingly complex molecules, and eventually arranged into the pattern that is you. You are not made of different stuff than stars. You are made of star stuff, as Carl Sagan said. But it's more profound than that. You are star stuff that has become conscious. You are the universe looking at itself, thinking about itself, wondering about itself. And if quantum mechanics is correct, if observation participates in making reality definite, then you are not just the universe observing itself. You are the universe participating in its own actualization, collapsing possibilities into actualities through the act of awareness. This is true whether or not consciousness involves quantum effects. Even if consciousness is purely classical, even if the observer effect has nothing to do with awareness, you are still a process by which the universe knows itself. You are still matter organized in such a way that it can contemplate its own existence. That's extraordinary. That's miraculous, in the original sense of the word, something that inspires wonder. But let's go deeper. Let's ask what we don't know, because the gaps in our knowledge are as important as what we understand. We don't know why the universe has the laws it has. Why quantum mechanics? Why these particular equations and not others? Why does superposition collapse? Why does entanglement exist? Why is there something rather than nothing? Physics can describe how the universe works with extraordinary precision, but it can't tell us why it works that way. The laws of physics are not derived from anything more fundamental. They're simply observed, tested, confirmed. We don't know why they're true, we just know that they are. And we don't know why consciousness exists. We can map the neural correlates of consciousness in exquisite detail. We can identify which brain regions are active during different experiences. We can even predict, with increasing accuracy, whether someone is conscious based on their brain activity. But we can't explain why any of this feels like something, why there's subjective experience at all. This is the hard problem of consciousness, and it remains completely unsolved. We have theories, integrated information theory, global workspace theory, higher-order thought theory, but none of them explain why information processing should feel like anything, why there should be something it's like to be you. Maybe consciousness is fundamental, like mass or charge. Maybe it emerges from information processing in ways we don't yet understand. Maybe it involves quantum effects. Maybe it doesn't. We simply don't know. And we don't know what happens to consciousness when the brain stops functioning. Does subjective experience end completely? Does it continue in some form? Is there something beyond death? These are not scientific questions in the usual sense. We can't experiment on what happens after death. But they're questions that matter to every conscious being. The honest answer is, we don't know. We have beliefs, hopes, fears, philosophical arguments, but we don't have knowledge. And that uncertainty is part of what it means to be human. We don't know if we're alone in the universe. The cosmos contains at least 2 trillion galaxies, each with hundreds of billions of stars. The probability that Earth is the only planet with life seems vanishingly small. But we haven't found anyone else. We haven't detected any signals, any artifacts, any evidence of other conscious observers. Maybe we're looking in the wrong places. Maybe consciousness is common, but technological civilizations are rare. Maybe they exist, but we can't recognize their communications. Maybe we're early, among the first conscious observers in a universe that will eventually teem with awareness. Or maybe we're late, the last survivors of a universe that once had countless civilizations, but has now fallen mostly silent. We don't know. And that not knowing should fill us with both humility and wonder. We don't know what consciousness is capable of. Can it exist without biological substrate? Could we upload minds to computers? Could artificial intelligence become genuinely conscious? Could consciousness survive the heat death of the universe by encoding itself in the quantum vacuum? These sound like science fiction questions, but they're becoming scientific questions. We're building artificial systems that process information in increasingly sophisticated ways. We're developing brain-computer interfaces. We're exploring the theoretical limits of computation and information processing. Within this century, we might have to confront these questions not as speculation, but as practical reality. And we don't know what the ultimate fate of the universe is. Will it expand forever, growing colder and darker until the last stars burn out and even black holes evaporate? Will it collapse back into a big crunch? Will it tear itself apart in a big rip? Will quantum fluctuations eventually create new universes from the vacuum? The mathematics gives us possibilities, but not certainties. The universe is still writing its story, and we don't know how it ends. But here's what we do know. Right now, in this moment, you are conscious. You are aware. You are experiencing these ideas, processing these words, having thoughts about the nature of reality and your place in it. That experience, that awareness, is the most certain thing you know. Descartes was right about that much. Quote 30. You might doubt everything else, but you can't doubt that you're having an experience right now. And that experience connects you to something profound. Because if consciousness involves quantum effects, if awareness participates in collapsing wave functions, then your experience right now is not just a passive reflection of reality, it's an active participation in making reality definite. But even if consciousness is purely classical, even if quantum mechanics has nothing to do with awareness, you're still participating in something extraordinary. You're still the universe becoming aware of itself. You're still matter organized in such a way that it can contemplate its own existence, wonder about its origins, imagine its future. Let me bring this back to where we started, because the circle needs to close. Remember those neutrinos passing through your body? 100 billion per second, streaming through you from the sun, from distant supernovae, from the Big Bang itself. Most of them will pass through the entire Earth without interacting with a single atom. But here's what's changed since you started reading. You're now aware of them. You've become conscious of these particles that have been passing through you your entire life. And that awareness, that observation, has changed something. Not the neutrinos themselves. They don't care whether you know about them. But your experience of reality has changed. You now live in a universe where you know that neutrinos are passing through you. That knowledge is real. It exists in the pattern of neural connections in your brain. It affects how you think about yourself and your relationship to the cosmos. And if consciousness involves quantum effects, then the act of becoming aware of this fact involved collapsing quantum superpositions in your brain. Multiple possible thoughts existed before you became conscious of this idea. Now, one definite thought exists. The thought you're having right now. You participated in creating that thought through the quantum mechanical process of becoming aware. Not creating it from nothing, but selecting it from possibilities, making it definite from indefinite, actualizing it from potential. This is what the observer effect means at the deepest level. Not that you can manifest parking spaces with your thoughts, but that consciousness, your consciousness, is a process by which possibilities become actualities, by which the quantum universe crystallizes into definite experience. And that process connects you to everything. The photons you see were in superposition until they hit your retina. The air you breathe contains molecules that were once part of other living things, entangled with their histories. The atoms in your body have been part of countless other structures, other beings, other moments in cosmic history. You are not separate from the universe. You are a temporary pattern in the flow of matter and energy, a local increase in complexity and organization. A brief moment when the universe becomes conscious of itself. But what a moment! What a pattern! What a miracle of organization that matter can arrange itself in such a way that it can think, feel, wonder, love, create, imagine, understand. You are made of quantum fields that extend across all of space. You are made of particles that were forged in stellar cores. You are made of molecules that have been part of the Earth for billions of years. You are made of patterns that have been shaped by 4 billion years of evolution. And somehow, impossibly, miraculously, all of that has organized itself into you. Into a being that can read these words, understand these ideas, contemplate the nature of reality and consciousness and observation. That's not diminished by uncertainty. That's not lessened by the fact that we don't know whether consciousness involves quantum effects. That's not reduced by our ignorance about the hard problem of consciousness or the ultimate fate of the universe. If anything, the uncertainty makes it more profound. Because it means you're living in a universe that still has mysteries, that still has questions without answers, that still has room for wonder and discovery and awe. You are not just observing reality, you are participating in it. Whether that participation involves quantum mechanics or not, whether consciousness collapses wave functions or not, you are still an integral part of the process by which the universe knows itself. Every observation you make, every thought you think, every moment of awareness is a moment when the universe becomes conscious of itself through you. You are the universe's way of experiencing itself, understanding itself, wondering about itself. And that makes you extraordinary. Not because you're separate from the universe, but because you're so deeply connected to it. Not because you can control reality with your thoughts, but because your thoughts are part of reality, emerging from it, shaped by it, participating in it. The observer effect, whether it involves consciousness or not, tells us something profound. Observation matters. Measurement changes systems. The act of extracting information from reality affects that reality. You are not outside the universe, passively watching. You are inside it, actively participating, constantly interacting, perpetually entangled. And if consciousness does involve quantum effects, if awareness does participate in collapsing wave functions, then that participation is even more fundamental than we imagined. Then consciousness is not just something that happens in the universe. It's part of the mechanism by which the universe becomes definite, by which possibilities become actualities, by which the quantum foam of potential crystallizes into the definite reality of experience. But we don't know. And maybe that's the most important thing to understand. We don't know. We're still figuring it out. We're still doing the experiments, refining the theories, asking the questions. And you're part of that process. By reading these words, by thinking about these ideas, by wondering about the relationship between consciousness and reality, you're participating in humanity's ongoing attempt to understand itself and its place in the cosmos. That's what it means to be human in the 21st century. We have extraordinary knowledge, quantum mechanics, neuroscience, cosmology, but we also have profound ignorance. We can describe the universe with mathematical precision, but we can't explain why it exists or what consciousness is, or whether we're alone. We live in the tension between knowledge and mystery, between understanding and wonder, between what we know and what we don't know. And that tension is not a problem to be solved. It's the condition of being conscious in a universe that's still revealing itself. So here's what I want you to take from this. You are not separate from reality. You are woven into it at every level: quantum, atomic, molecular, cellular, neural, conscious. Your observations are not passive. They're active interactions that affect what you observe, even if that effect is just the mundane collapse of quantum states through environmental decoherence. You are the universe observing itself, and whether or not consciousness involves quantum mechanics, that's extraordinary. That's profound. That's worthy of wonder. The observer effect is real. Quantum mechanics is real. The relationship between observation and reality is strange and counterintuitive and still not fully understood. But it's telling us something important. You matter. Your observations matter. Your consciousness matters. Not because you can manifest reality with your thoughts, you can't, but because you're part of the process by which reality becomes definite, by which the universe knows itself, by which possibilities become actualities. And that process is happening right now, as you read these words, as you think these thoughts, as you experience this moment of awareness. You are participating in the universe's ongoing act of self-creation, self-observation, self-understanding. That's not mysticism, that's physics. Strange physics, uncomfortable physics, physics that challenges our intuitions, but physics nonetheless. And it's telling us that we're not separate from the universe we observe. We're part of it. Deeply, fundamentally, quantum mechanically part of it. Our observations are not external to reality. They're part of reality, shaping it, participating in it, making it definite through the act of awareness. So the next time you look at the stars, remember, you're not just seeing light from distant suns. You're collapsing wave functions that have been traveling through space for years or centuries or millennia. You're making definite what was indefinite. You're participating in creating the history of the universe by observing it. And the next time you have a thought, remember, you're not just processing information. You might be collapsing quantum superpositions in your brain, selecting one possibility from many, creating your experience through the act of becoming aware. We don't know if that's true, but the possibility is real. And either way, you're still the universe becoming conscious of itself. You're still matter organized in such a way that it can wonder about its own existence. You're still participating in something extraordinary. That's what the observer effect really means. Not that you have magical powers, but that you're not separate from reality. You're part of it. And your observations, your awareness, participates in making it what it is. The universe is not a stage on which you act. It's a collaborative process in which observation and reality co-create each other, moment by moment, through the strange and beautiful mathematics of quantum mechanics. And you are part of that process. Right now, in this moment. As you read these words and become aware of these ideas and wonder about your place in the cosmos, you are the observer, and the observer matters. Perhaps the most profound question isn't whether consciousness collapses wave functions. Perhaps it's this. In a universe that might not become fully real until it's observed, what does it mean that you're here, now, observing it?